Hello, I'm Philroy, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about nobility, because people wonder just what is nobility? Nobility is a mod that I've been working on, an expansion, for a long time, and it's a long and complicated mess. And it deserves to have some explanations put out about it, so let's see what we can figure out. It's intended to be a collaborative, community-based expansion. Parts of it are my work, but a lot of it has been the collective gestalt of the TI4 Homebrew community over the years, producing good ideas. I've, along with talking to some other like-minded individuals, have been actively collecting, with permission, talking to the original creators of the ideas, or where we ran across them saying, hey, can we use this idea? And they say, yeah, sure, run with it. So we said, okay, thanks. But collecting ideas and different things that work well together to build a cohesive expansion that feels like an expansion that was intended to always be played together, not just a bunch of stuff thrown at a table and mixed together. Anybody who's played around with Minecraft mod packs will know what I mean when I talk about lots of mods that just get crammed together into a pack and they kind of work in parallel to each other, but they don't really work together. We didn't want that. We wanted something that was a kind of a cohesive, stitched together expansion, and so that's what we've been working on doing. History of the project. I've been working on this now for 3 years, and I'm not done yet. I'm one guy working on and off when I have time, in between life and work and other stuff going on. Other people have worked on their parts of it at whatever they've had time, and it's slow going. 3 years ago is my earliest digital record, that I could go back and point to at times where I had a hard time timestamp on a Google Doc that I had been started with the purpose of recording this stuff on. I know I was thinking about ideas that ended up being included in Nobility before that. So a little over 3 years in the making. When you consider that TI4 has been out for about 4, those ideas have been floating around for a while. Really, I started putting them down though early summer of 2018. Collaborative project kicked off in really January 2020. So here we are, a little ways late after that. Let me back up here. We've made good progress at times. There was a time, like, pretty close to before POK was announced. I can think back to, hey, we were producing stuff, and yeah, people were interested in what we were doing, because turns out they were playtesters, and stuff that we were bouncing around in the homebrew community we were developing, and good examples of convergent design, at the same time that they were developing the same stuff for POK. And it's like, hey, was there a leak? Were we, it's just like they would have an idea and we'd have an idea. And there's lots of examples of this going on throughout history, but it makes sense when you think about, we're starting with the same base material, we're looking at the same historical material, looking at the same game systems for how to expand and incorporate stuff. It's not surprising that we had some educated guesses that were similar to what we saw in Prophecy of Kings. And we actually had a couple of rough playtests early on, and they were valuable, and things changed. Prophecy of Kings came along. Some parts of our design just needed to be scrapped, because POK did it, and we're going to base it off the official systems. We didn't need to worry about leaders. We didn't need to worry about mechs. We didn't know what the exploration mechanic was going to be. System tiles were coming. Hyperlanes were coming. These were all things that had been homebrewed and were being included, or intended to be included, but didn't end up needed. But we also had some unique ideas as well that just needed to be rebuilt to use POK game mechanics. And we didn't want to let that go to waste. So we continued. We didn't just abandon Nobility. We just kind of threw it on the back burner for a while. And fortunately, due to some of those same convergent idea designs, that means we were abandoning a bunch of work. Also meant the work that we were not abandoning wasn't that hard to adapt to POK stuff to continue to use it and keep moving forward. And so we were able to keep, our new overhauled objective system, economic overhaul, strategy cards and rules, civilian ships and units, new treasury, purple. This was a long, laborious process to get it to work with POK, because it wasn't like we were kind of starting over, but we had to rewrite it from scratch. But we weren't abandoning the ideas, we weren't abandoning the abilities that we thought up. We just had to make it work a slightly different way. And the community helped too. It wasn't just me doing it. There are lots of people who have helped out, and and they continued to do with the homebrew community for TI4, which is continue to be fascinated by TI4 and the ideas that it produces. And we produced a lot of ideas since POK came out. And I sat back, and I freely admit, I played a little bit of a puppet master, and I made little suggestions here and there. I said, oh, that's a great idea. Would you think about taking it in this direction? Because if they took it that direction, it would dovetail in better with Nobility, and I could co-opt it into the expansion with permission. And being upfront about it. I mean, honestly, ultimately, I was very upfront about it, but nudging things to make things fit. But military advisors, the leader mercs expansion, mercenaries. Yeah, guess what? Now we call them military advisors, and thematically they fit right in seamlessly. Facilities was updated. I had been looking at making facilities, but why make my own facilities when I can use somebody else's work that does a better job than what I was coming up with some minor tweaks to make it fit right. And especially when I'm working with the original creator on it, go for it. Monuments is getting updated. Lots of action cards, agendas, relics, exploration cards get tossed around in the community. Here, there, our Discord, SCPT Discord, the Aussie Discord, over in the German Discord. I mean, on Reddit threads and Board Game Geek threads and Facebook groups, you see these ideas floating around, and every once in a while you go, hey, that's a great idea. That fits right in. Let's see what we can do with that. That said, I will admit that I have not done a good job of keeping track of who's contributed. So if you see something in Nobility that looks like your work, I really hope that I remembered to ask you to borrow it or not. For the most part I did, and conversion design is a thing, and I may have asked somebody who came up with something similar, so I won't guarantee that it was yours. But in the spirit of conversion design, if you saw it and it looked like something you did, good on you. Thank you for contributing, and let me know and I'll get you credit when we produce an actual credit file. But really, well, some of the ideas in there are mine and the design is mine. A lot of it is just facilitating and dovetailing things to make it all fit together. Coming up with cards and things to make different mechanics and different systems integrate with each other so that they don't, so they crosstalk to each other. But it worked out. Things have been fitted. And again, we wanted it to feel like a cohesive whole. And it's been an amazing process. I saved a lot of old digital files in my Google Drive that I go back to and I look at when I need to brainstorm, because there are ideas that I have had abandoned, come back to, abandoned again, reworked, brought back in, abandoned again, in just this iterative design process over and over and over again. And I'd like to show you where we're at right now, so that you can see where we're at. Major areas of focus that we figured on. You know, Prophecy of Kings does leaders, Prophecy of Kings does exploration, Prophecy of Kings does relics. We're gonna do a little bit of that to do, you know, to make our mechanics fit into those systems. But those aren't, we don't need to worry about designing that stuff. Where things that we saw the design space to work on was a player-driven in-game objective selection voting system. Players get objectives in their hands. They choose objectives that they think are beneficial to themselves, and they put them up for vote. And the players, as a group, decide what objectives they're going to use for their game. This means if you have a group of people that want to play Space Monopoly and try and go for spend objectives and make a ton of money, you can do that. If you want to put objectives into the game that are bloodthirsty, murder everybody kind of things, you can do that. You want to play Space Risk and you got a group of players who want to play Space Risk, you could play a grand game of Space Risk and not get frustrated because that's all the spend objectives coming up, which means you have to spend money on spend objectives instead of buying plastic to go murder your neighbor. Make it the objectives you want to play. I thought the speaker was neat, and I created a whole host of additional roles that all have a purpose in the game and do different things in the game and manipulate systems in the game. You know, if you look at the speaker as being the speaker manipulates what? Voting order and initiative in a very pervasive way throughout lots of different steps of the game. You have a commissar who's in charge of leadership and intimidation stuff. You have an inquisitor that's in charge of technology and keeping it under control, in addition to fostering it. There's a chamberlain who's in charge of manning the nobility, as it were. He's in charge of the emperor's private chambers, and he has the king's, the emperor's ear, as it were. That kinds of stuff. There's an administrator who is in charge of administering the empire on a day-to-day operational level and managing the masses and stuff like that. There's a Grand Admiral who's in charge of the Imperial Navy. Go figure. And yes, there's an Imperial Navy floating around. It's opposed to bringing in mercenary units. You simply have the Imperial Navy that is in charge of keeping peace, and they have their massive frigates all over the galaxy, and strangely enough, they're in charge of keeping the peace, but they sure will take bribes to get involved in local squabbles and enforce the law as a matter of helping you to put holes in somebody else's ships. It's kind of funny, but there's mechanics there. I'll show you that when we get to the law. We added a whole tree of civilian units and a civilian-focused tech, where it's to add some more life and vibrancy to the galaxy, so it doesn't just feel like a bunch of warships running around bashing each other, but it's an Imperium that is filled with civilian traffic too. So we wanted to try and bring that lifeblood to the map in some small way. Rework the trade good economy. Trade goods now have colors, which plays into whether they count for you as trade goods or commodities. Super simple. That was another thing I like to do, is I wanted to keep simples and rules exceedingly simple and easy to understand, but with complex nuances in how they worked out long term. So expanded the trade good economy. Imperium-wide events. Events will show up periodically that, boom, impact different parts of the galaxy or the Imperium as a whole. And so now you feel like there's stuff going on in the background, and you're set on the grand tapestry of the entire game. That's the hope. Will it work out that way? Well, the proof is in the fun. So we got to play it and find out. We added a couple of new leader types, advisors. Like I said before, those are your mercenary leaders. There's a leader for every faction in the game who will hire himself out to the highest bidder and do stuff for you that is in the vein of that faction's normal abilities. But you gotta pay an upkeep. Mercenaries like to get paid. If they ain't getting paid, they leave them. So these leaders reflect that. You gotta pay an upkeep cost to keep them active, keep them doing stuff for you, otherwise they leave. Diplomats are your leader for your leadership's tie-in to the objective system and selecting stuff. And they also then ties into the civilian units because you have a neutral diplomatic craft that flies around and interacts with your leader for your diplomat for going to the Senate. We've added additional faction-based stuff, player-based stuff, neutral Imperial facilities. There are facilities now that are player-based, where it's every player has their own set of these abilities to tweak their empire a little bit. You know, that planet that you have that's 0-2 and has 2 influence, but you have to spend like a 1-2 resource planet to make it work, to get that 1 command counter. So it's that command counter is costing you 3 influence and 2 resources, and you're like, this is a crazy stupid deal. You can build a facility on that influence planet to raise its influence value by 1, so now it's worth 3 on its own. You don't have to waste those other resources for it. But it takes a little time to do that. You got to invest in building buildings. And then there are the neutral Imperial facilities. These are cornerstone buildings of the government of the Imperium as a whole. Each role is associated with a strategy card, which is associated with a ministry or a bureau or a branch of the Imperial government. And these facilities can be found on the map, and if you know where they are, you can manipulate them, and they can give you abilities to do stuff. And then, of course, you know, action cards, exploration cards, agendas, all kinds of stuff to try to tie all this together and to make and influence all the different stuff we added. It sounds like a lot. I promise you it's not as scary as you think it sounds off the bat. So let's take a look here and see what we got. Future plans, just in a nutshell, keep refining and balancing. We're getting to the point now where we can actually start to play test this. Stuff will be broken, no doubt about it. A lot of numbers, we had to kind of guess what was right based on our gut and our experience. And I think we're pretty close, but there may be some things that don't work the way that we thought they would, or need to have the values tweaked. No big deal. That's just proof is in the play. Test it, and it'll be fine. There are a couple of design spaces left to explore. Right now, diplomats are kind of cookie cutters for everybody. We're looking at maybe tweaking a little faction ability where different kinds of diplomacy come from different kinds of factions. Some people are more into gunboat diplomacy. Some people are more into stab them in the back diplomacy. Some people are more into rally the people diplomacy. Those are thoughts that we're thinking about and looking at trying to tweak into our faction, you know, potentially making the diplomats from cookie cutters into factions. And of course, relics, agendas, explorations, cards, all that stuff. Maybe some more planetary systems anomalies. We're still getting used to POK and the system selection for what's available. So there's a chance, though, that we might want to add things. I think that with anomalies, there is some room for maybe some more new anomaly types that have different game effects than what we're used to seeing. Not sure where we're going with that. That's something I just got cooking in the back of my head and I'm keeping my eye out for. And of course, even since the time I assembled these tabletop simulator tables to show you folks, as I've been going through it the last day or so and showing people stuff, I've got a notebook here full of notes that are stuff that I've discovered that needs to get fixed. Stuff that I hadn't updated. You know, I designed at one point in time and then I changed a system or changed terminology and never got back to rebuilding the components. So we'll get there. That's the core systems are in place. It's just sometimes the wording is funky. Too easy. So anyway, let's go look at it. You want to see some historical docs? I'm gonna show you, pull up some of my spreadsheets in Google Drive real quick, just for 2 minutes to zoom through, so you get a sense of how deep it goes. And then I'll show you a game that it looks like it's been set up for it, and then I'll dig into some of the components, and we can go through some of the components, and you can get a taste of some of the deeper mechanics and how it all works. There we go. All right. This is where I had, this is my objective list. And even this is out of date at this point. I spent some time today, printed these out, compared them what I actually had in the game, and yeah. Even these lists are out of date now because I made changes and stuff, and I gotta go through these things again. And let's move my face over here so I'm not in the way. So, but yeah, we're working on this stuff. This is where I was working on. Helpful if I click in the right place. Turn order stuff. Starting to establish the updated turn order. I've got something in the game. I've already discovered things that are wrong with it that I need to fix. It's the nature of building a mod. There's always more ideas than you've got to deal with the details. Trade good update. In a nutshell, trade goods, if it's your color, you call it a commodity, and it's a commodity for you, and it has no value for you. If it's not your color, it's a trade good, and it has value for you. And that's about sums it up. There's an Imperial Treasury, so now there is an actual game economy in play, where, yeah, the Hakan are 6 commodity faction, and the Barony are a 2 commodity faction. Well, guess what? Now the Hakan are flooding the economy with their trade goods at 3 times the rate of the Barony player. So that means the Hakan are more likely to run into their own, 3 times as likely to run into their own trade goods out in the markets, and they don't want those things. So don't worry, it works itself out, and I've got mechanisms in play to keep the economy under control artificially, but it's little fine details, fine nuances that you get to juggle now and think about. These are your, some of your custodian tokens that I was working on is for what they do and stuff. I'm talking about Imperial Units and factions. This is stuff that I abandoned because somebody came along and did a better job. So let's go with what somebody did that was better. Looking at faction objectives, faction IOUs, faction promissory notes. Yeah, I've still got all this stuff. I'm not doing it. It doesn't fit well with what we're doing, and designs went different directions. But I've still got it in the back of my head if I need it for ideas for things. And don't worry, this list goes farther and on. I've got some agenda ideas here I need to come back and revisit, because there are things in here that I can adapt for stuff that we got going on now. Strategy cards, what I was looking to do in a primary, secondary, tertiary on one card, which I'm doing now, but I'm doing it in a different way. This was an older version of it. Stuff that I had on the drawing board, action cards. As we're moving here through the sheets, we're getting into older stuff. You know, old design overview. And this page was done months and months, a couple of years ago. But even then, you know, I'll show you on a different page here where I went through and I said, hey, what's in POK, what's not? And I basically took this and I said, hey, this is in POK, I don't need to worry about this. But even then, there's a lot of stuff here that early on we were looking at doing. Leader ideas. I'm looking at the old TI3 leaders and what they were and how they worked and what they did. That stuff may show up in slightly different form with our faction diplomats and stuff. But leaders are outrated. We don't really need to touch this stuff. So it's there for reference, but we're not using it. Who are the custodians? You know, what are their roles? This was an old thing where I was working on objectives, trying to come up with them and build them. Still got it here. Still stuff in here that I'm not using, stuff that I am using. But what's, you know, in here, what are the thoughts about what, because we have different, there are 8 different objective decks now. 9 if you count the secret deck. We turned a 4X game into an 8X game. And each of these objective decks is thematically attached to one of those 8 X's. This one only lists 6, but you know, like I said, it's an older version. Strategy cards, you know, what dual-sided strategy cards, just ultimately 2 different strategy cards. Yeah, we were looking at this kind of stuff early on, and it's in there still. It's not, doesn't look like this anymore, but it's in there. But yeah, there's lots of stuff here. Let me roll up here to the beginning here. And see if I can find it. Event decks. No. Maybe it was this page. Trade goods and trade consortium. Gamble your trade goods in a free market exchange. Yeah, that's the Imperial Treasury now. Doesn't work anything like this. Says here, but it's in there in a different form. Leader units, not really in there anymore. We have leaders, but we have some civilian units that do have some game effects, so it's kind of there. Planets, it's in there. You know, looking at additional planets, POK did that. We don't need to mess with it. At least not yet, although we may tuck a couple of things in just for funsies. Exploration, moons, special bases, monuments. Yeah, we were talking neutral buildings. We were talking about this stuff years ago before POK came out. Adventure cards. Cards with flavor text and choices for players to make. That's kind of what we ended up with. We don't have a whole lot of flavor text necessarily on those cards for simplicity, but we were looking at that. Convergent design is a thing. You look at where we were starting. The assistant, nobody's ideas were stealing anybody. Dane's conscience is clear, and I assure you, no weirdness. Yes, the community was ready to do these things, which is why it's here. Academy, hire the best and brightest, the upcoming minds. Gee, that turned into the Mercenaries mod. Somebody else did it better. We're using what they did. We just adapted it. Senate, your revised strategy cards, victory points, new hexes, monuments, faction objectives. We've got them in there. They're not what I had here, but it's because somebody else did something that worked better and fit better with what we need, so I didn't need to look at this stuff. Neutral stations, neutral facility stuff, racial Imperial infrastructure was a big one. Planets and facilities that are out there. Racial agendas is kind of in there with faction objectives now. to where each factions have ways to get at their racial technology without having to go through the research system, which I think is important in this one, as starting objectives. So I mean, lots of this stuff made it in there. You know, and I was looking at, you know, how were we going to break the rules with it? What were the concerns for balance? How were we going to balance that stuff? When we did it, what kind of fun were we trying to add to the game when we did it? Looking at it kind of deeper than just going, ooh, shiny, this sounds cool, let's do it. No, let's stop and ask, why are we doing it? What are we doing it for? What's the fun we're trying to bring to the table? That kind of stuff. But that's just one design document. I've got, you know, I did surveys about what people's perceptions were for different factions' diplomatic skills, so that we could look at that stuff. You know, objectives for Noble, TI4 customs, stuff that other people have done, the TI4 action cards, new tech, Captain's game tech, I mean, I've been digging through all kinds of stuff, and these are just the spreadsheets. I mean, I'm not even going to go look at the documents. You know, there's stuff in the docs, you know, the guilds, Nobility tournaments, Term Homebrew. There's a list of homebrew expansions, what's out there, the Civics mini expansion, looking at ancient technology, Skitten Yard, somebody's homebrew faction. Discarding Stars project. This is from April 29th, 2021. Monuments, Civilians Purple Tech, Digging in Discordant Stars lore, Mercenaries, yeah, just January 25th, 2020, TI4 Nobility. So, you know, boom, getting back there. May 25th. You know, I asked Billy to come up with some stuff for me, and he sent me a list of some stuff. I mean, so I've been asking and very consciously looking to ask for other people's input, because I figured this was one of those things where, since I'm trying to create a product that is going to fit a lot of different people's wants and desires, it makes sense to look at those wants and desires early. Let them give input into things. And now we're down back into earlier days, back when I was working with XCOM stuff. So you know, but it's all here. Yeah. Now here, March 28th, 2020. Yep, that was an earlier version. I was thinking about calling it Warriors, Explorers, and Statesmen. I mean, I've been hamming these ideas around for a while, and they're showing to show true. Anyway, enough talk of history. I've been blabbering for a while now. Let's, I don't even know how long I have been talking. Too long. Let's get into the game. Boom. There we go. You'll notice that, for the most part, you know, a play area looks mostly like the play area you're used to seeing. You get some extra ships over here because we don't have a fancy place to put them onto a bar yet, but these are your civilian ships. We've got some facilities over here that you can find in this deck here for what they are and what they do. The embassy, what does the embassy do? You can place it on an industrial planet or a cultural planet or Mechatol Rex. This is a structure. It increases the value of the planet by X versus plus to the total numbers of this and adjacent systems. So if you can get a bunch of people who are willing to build embassies all next to each other, you get a big cluster of embassies. People talking to people. Who'd have think it? And it increases the resource value of the planet by X, where X is the total number of embassies in this and adjacent systems. So it's at least guaranteed it's going to be +1. You get an X plus another embassy, it's +2, +3, +4. If you were sitting on Mechatol Rex and you had 1 in each of the surrounding systems, that would be +7. It's kind of insane. Who made this thing? Oh yeah. Just kidding. It's the embassy. The embassy is this one here. Boom. You know, you build that guy out there. If you want to, colony somewhere, you could build it pretty much on anything. Basic facility. Colony just increases the influence by 1. Trade station. Put a trade station out there. You could build that on any of the basic planet types, or anything that has one of those basic types. It produces, let's see, what does this do? When placed, draw 2 trade goods from treasury and place them on this planet. Oh yeah, trade goods can go on planets and in systems, and they represent cargo that has value and can be hauled around the map. So, you're like, but I don't want to spend my time having my carriers do all that, because carriers, cost 3 and have a capacity of 6. Well, if you're sold, they're great. But you have civilian units, little civilian freighters that can move around. The advantages of their civilian units, so they don't spark combat. They can move through enemy systems and coexist with enemy units, and as long as the active player, when he activates the system, doesn't want to include the civilians in the fight, civilians can just move around. If he wants to blow up the civilian ships ain't got no guns, they just go pop. If combat occurs in the same sphere as the civilian as that unit, no, it got cut off. Basically, if combat happens, civilians go pop. These guys just run around and haul cargo and go snipe trade goods from planets before your neighbors can snipe those trade goods for themselves. Trade convoys, you could set them up. They kind of establish, a little portable trade thing. And when you refresh your commodities, you get a couple of their trade goods, and you leave a couple of trade goods of yours floating loose in the system that he has to waste time going to pick up. Meanwhile, you get them for free, straight from him, straight to you. You got a guild ship, which is kind of like an armed escort, massive. It's a cargo ship with a little bit of capacity, but it also has actually combat dice and the ability to maneuver around and do stuff, and yeah, they're big, nasty ships. And you have Consular Yachts. These are little diplomatic vessels that you're trying to get to Mechatol Rex because they influence the diplomacy game around Mechatol Rex. But again, battles break out, these things go, what? Pop. And they just get blown up real easy. You get a couple of tech-specific ways to unlock your racial objectives, your racial tech, your faction tech. Let me use the correct terminology. Your faction technology. And stuff. And then you have Imperial Units. Yes, this card is bright and ugly and nasty, and you don't want to get it confused. This is not your ship. This is what the stats for the Imperial ship are. It does a little bit of everything. It costs 4, but you don't really ever have to pay for it yourself. Unless you want to. There are reasons. Complicated ones. We'll get into that later. But generally speaking, the Imperial Treasury is paying for their own ships, and it's the Admiral who's deciding how many ships to build and where, and he's paying for it out of the Imperial Treasury. And then these ships are flying around, and for one trade good, you can hire an Imperial frigate to join you in your fight to go blow up the bad guys. Enjoy. Just remember that when you're done with the fight and you take over the planet, the Imperial frigate is still floating in orbit overhead, and somebody else could come along and bribe them to help them kick you off the planet. Basically what it boils down to is when it comes to assigning hits in a fight, hits must be assigned to military ships first, then Imperial ships, then civilian ships. In that order, there's a priority system. So the Imperial ships will try to protect the civilians and take the hits first, because that's their job, so to speak, but it works. Factions have a monument that can only be built on certain planetary types, and there's rules for what it takes to produce it. When you would place a space dock using the construction strategy card, you may place your monument instead. So when you're going to build a space dock, when the rules say build a space dock, you can do your monument instead. If the rules say build a PDS, that's what lets you build your normal facilities. So space docks let you do your special stuff. PDS constructions you can use to subvert to build your normal facilities. You'll have a couple of these guys and fewer of these guys. You know, you get one of your advanced structures, and you'll get 2 each of the basic structures. Is the intent there. Civilians, you get your stats over here. We get into what speech means, and this is actually not 5 combat, it's 5 voting. That represents your faction's voting power for when you have to roll voting dice, which we'll get to in a bit. It's not complicated, promise. And then your space here for your advisor card when you get an advisor leader. But it all fits. You could even rearrange these if you wanted to put your leader token, you know, take the leaderboard out and put the civilian tab in, and then have the leaders out here and then the civilians, and yeah, arrange it how you want. But you have a treasury. Whenever you spend trade goods, they go in the treasury. And whenever the rules tell you to gain trade goods, either from an exploration card or from the trade primary, you just draw them randomly from the Imperial Treasury, which means that the more money you've spent of your trade good type, the more likely you are to draw your own commodities back. And I hope you have space for them, because if you draw more than you can handle, they're lost. They just go back to your supply. But yeah, so you have the Imperial Treasury now. It's out there. Strategy cards. These look pretty normal. For the vast majority of them, there may be some minor changing to some wording to meet the updated systems. But you'll notice they have a tertiary ability. That's to gain your role tokens. If you take leadership, you can do the tertiary. You do the primary, then everybody else does the secondary, and when the card comes back to you, before you end it, you have the decision of whether or not you do the tertiary ability, which for most of them is just, are you or are you not going to claim the Commissar token? This guy gets the Chancellor token. This guy does the Speaker token. This guy does the Construction token, or the Administrator. Trade does the Treasurer. This is the Admiral, the Inquisitor, the Chamberlain, and then Imperial. This is where you become Regent, because nobility is about who gets to be the Regent for the young fledgling Emperor who is too young to rule the throne. Because we're not going to steal the throne from him. Instead, we are going to be crowned Regent and rule in his stead until he becomes of age. If he manages to come of age, and yeah, you get it. You know how all that stuff works. But you know, so you know, your one turn, you get leadership, and you take the Commissar token, and now you get pass abilities. Every role has a pass ability. It's an ability that you use as your pass action. When the Commissar passes, he gets to pick somebody else and make them make a little pocket tactical action somewhere. The Treasurer gets to clean all their trade goods out of the Treasury and put them back in their supply, so they don't have to worry about drawing their own trade goods out of the Treasury anymore. Renovation. Select one Imperial structure from the Imperial structure. Yeah, build an Imperial structure every turn. Power. Oh, by the way, when the speaker passes, he gets to decide whether the voting order is going to go clockwise or counterclockwise. And he declares that when he passes. This turn we're going to go this way. Nope, now we're going to go this way. No, you know what? I think it's time to go this way again. No, you know what? I think we'll go this way again. The Chancellor, when he passes, he gets to move civilian ships around for free, ignoring command tokens. He can just move them, disperse them, help them to move around to represent just civilian ships moving and doing their own thing in the background. He also gets these Chancellor Order tokens, which are part of his super strategy card, which I'll explain in a minute. The Regent gets to use unplayed or unscored strategy secondaries. He just picks ones that he wants to do, and he gets to do them because he's the Regent, and he gets to do 2 of them when he passes. I can see him using that. A lot of warfare secondary. Hard to pick on the Regent. The Cabinet. Cabinet, he gets to pick something on the docket and say, you know what, we're not going to do that one this turn. That objective that player really wanted to come in so that they could do it next turn, no, we're not. That one's on hold. We're gonna forget that one in my pocket and forget to talk about that one this turn. The Inquisitor gets to forbid technology. He gets to look at the board and say, oh, everybody's getting Lightwave. I don't have Lightwave. I'm going to forbid it as my pass action. Nobody can use Lightwave deflectors anymore until somebody takes the Inquisitor away from that player, and everything that the previous Inquisitor had forbidden gets unforbidden. You haven't lost the technology. You haven't unresearched it or forgotten it. You just can't use it in the interim. And then Guard. This is where the Admiral produces the Imperial Guard and produces frigates all over the galaxy to enforce the law. But I talked about super strategy cards. Okay, I take in leadership. Now I'm the Commissar. Next turn comes around. Oh, leadership comes to me again. Oh wait, I don't play leadership because I am the Commissar. I play intimidation instead. I flip the card over and I use what's on the backside. I do this primary where I gain 2 command tokens. I didn't really need a whole lot of command tokens anyway, because I just played leadership primary. I also, however, get to pick any leader to exhaust. This may relock the leader. Oh yeah, that's exhausted. You can't use him right now. And you may have to pay fees or meet a victory condition to get it unlocked again. Mostly this isn't be an issue with commanders. Yeah. Intimidation. That's what the Commissar is all about. Intimidating people and getting what he wants. Oh, and the secondary. And these values may change a little bit, but if people want to do stuff, they're going to have to pay you. And all of these have secondaries. You know, diplomacy becomes intrigue. Politics becomes power, trade becomes, or construction becomes renovation, trade becomes economics, warfare becomes guard, council becomes cabinet, and even imperial becomes privilege. Because this one's special. Imperial, if you are If you play Imperial and you control Mechatol Rex, you must complain the Regency token. You must become Regent, which means you give up any other role that you had, and now you are locked into it. Now, you remember that whole gain 1 victory point if you control Mechatol Rex? You'll notice it is not on the other side. So we no longer have to worry about somebody who holds Mechatol Rex scoring 8 million guac points off of Imperial. They do, however, get to use the Exalt deck to select one Exalt objective, and they place it face down in the scoring area to be revealed as a public objective during the next status evade. These Exalt objectives, exalt yourself, hold yourself up and, bring honor to yourself, are crazy little objectives that do crazy things. There we go. Here's the Exalt deck. These are challenges that only one person can score. So obviously the Regent is going to be looking through this deck and picking things out that he thinks he is going to be able to score, and he can prepare himself, because only he knows what it is, to try to be able to score it. That said, when it's revealed, it's open season for that guac point. And I'll get more into what all these decks are and how they're different and what's going on with them. They start locked. The only one that's unlocked in the beginning is Excel, because Exalt is a special deck for just the Regent to use. So, boom. There you go. So only the Excel objectives, but then for using the Chamberlain strategy card, for Council or Cabinet. Council. The Council action, you can remove these and unlock other objective types to begin collecting and using to put on the docket to try and get into the game. And that covers the vast majority of it. You do have an objective docket system here where players will play cards to it to fill up the available number of spaces. The size of the docket grows as turns progress, so more. But the player who gets to put stuff on the docket is the player in last place. It's a built-in catch-up mechanic to try and give the guy in last place a chance to put objectives out there and get objectives into the game that likely work for him or her, for them, for it, whatever, work for them, it, whatever, because we're looking at Mantis AI here down the road. I'm always planning ahead. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but there's a little part of my brain that's thinking about it now before we get there 10 years from now. Yeah. Anyway, derail my brain. So you get the docket and then objectives and stuff going out here. Let's go and switch boards, because I have a board where this is all laid out and we can look at cards in greater detail and see what's involved in everything. I'm working on adding some action cards. These are some of the things that I'm adding. Some of these will be familiar. A lot of these are modified. A lot of these showed up in our charity game list last Christmas, but I've adapted them. Mission of Mercy, for example. You can, if you are not involved in a combat, because you have no combat chips there, you can play before a sits or assigned during a space combat round to generate and take a hit on one of your adjacent ships to rescue one of your civilian ships from that system and keep it from getting blown up. Conventions of war. Play at the start of a space combat. All players with civilian ships in the active system may move their civilian ships to an adjacent system of their choice. Let everybody, let the women and children go free before you blow each other up. Stuff like that. Give aid. This is my here. Maybe this will help. It's a skip. It's really all it is. It's a skip. It's a skip, but it costs you 1 trade good, and you give it to the player in last place. There you go. Maybe this will help. And then end your turn. It made me laugh. Safe passage. I like this card. Before announcing retreats, place this card in your play area. Your opponent may place all of their units in the active system on this card. At the start of the status card, pass this card to a player with units on this card. Units on this card may then be produced at no cost. Discard this card when no units remain on this card. So there's like, hey, I'm attacking your big stuff. I could stomp it, but I'm just gonna let you go. Just go. Take your fleet. Take your blessed dreadnoughts or whatever you got there, and go. Enjoy. Some agenda stuff related to monuments and different aspects there. Got some exploration cards here that I've already started to produce for getting Imperial facilities out there. You know, you find Imperial facilities in the exploration decks. Plus, there are other ways to find them and build them. You know, you got your faction-specific stuff. Color-specific stuff. You know, these are all our facilities. This is the trade stations, refineries. Yeah. You know. Core factory. Place a PDS, you can put a core factory down, and then as an action you can replace it later with 1 valid non-space dock structure. You can turn it into anything, including an Imperial facility, including another advanced facility. You can put it somewhere. It's a production 1, so you could use it as a production 1 somewhere. Very briefly, until you turn it into something else. Naval base for fighters. Logistics hub increases your commodity value. You know, the embassy we talked about. Research lab. You know, when a planet becomes exhausted during the action phase, add a trade guard to it. And then when you use technology, you can spend trade goods from here. Well, also there are trade goods on the planet now. Somebody can come by with a freighter and steal your trade goods before you get a chance to spend them. Yeah. You know, colored trade goods. There's a green, there's a pink. There's a yellow, white. You get the idea. Boom. Fun stuff. Roles. We kind of went through these. Talked about the Treasury, Imperial facility. Each of these Imperial facilities matches one of the roles. The Military Academy goes with the Commissar. If you can find the Military Academy out on the map and you control it, you can exhaust the Military Academy to claim the Commissar role. Hi, I've been elected President of the Imperial facility. You're no longer the Commissar. You'd like to think you are, but you aren't. Yoink. You do not pay the upkeep for advisors. Get a leader out and use it for free until somebody steals it from you, and then you have to pay for your advisors that you weren't planning on paying for. The Imperial Mint, whenever you would place commodities into the Treasury, return them to your reinforcements instead. So whenever you're going to put your commodities into the Treasury, you just put them to your reinforcements instead, so you're not polluting the Treasury the same way. Navy shipyards, production 1, when producing ships in the system. You can remove ships to use their value to build new ships, bigger ships. Basically, you can rebuild and retrofit your ships into other kinds of ships. architectural reserves. This planet can just, it's an architectural marvel. You could put any number of structures on it, ignoring limits. I'm sure this is busted somehow. I don't care. Assembly hall. You get pocket agendas. You hide 2 agendas under this card, and if you control the structure, whenever you draw an agenda, you can swap it for one of the ones that's under this agenda before you have to do stuff with it. Be it reveal it, put it in the discard pile, or you put it back on the top or the bottom of the agenda deck. Stuff like that. You get 2 pocket agendas that you can swap stuff around with. Now be aware, if somebody takes the assembly hall from you, they get your pocket agendas. Private chambers. You can exhaust this to give the people in last place voting dice, while you get the same number of voting dice yourself. The oubliette. This one I laugh. I'm an evil person. When an action card is played, you exhaust this card and give any card under this card to the player playing a card. The card they are playing is canceled and placed under this card. It's like a sabotage that's reused, but the card that you're playing and you're canceling is not being canceled, it's being imprisoned. But it can only imprison 1 card at a time. So if you go to imprison a second card, whatever card is under here goes to the person that you're taking something from. So, it's like you take a Sabo from one guy and you put it under there, and then somebody else plays something else that you hate even more than a Sabo, like a Reactor Meltdown. But then you give them the Sabo that's under here to get the Reactor Meltdown under here, or whatever. So it'll mix the action cards up, and cards that are under here are out of play and can't be affected by stuff. So you can bury a card under here. And then the law quartz. This lets you move the custodian's token as a legal influence shield around the map and put it in different systems, and people have to pay an influence cost to attack that system. It's not the same as diploing a system, but you're tying that system up in legal battles, and people have to spend influence to do anything in that system. We have events. These are something that'll require a lot of play time and play testing to see if they work. These came from the community. And I had to modify them to soften. Some of these were rather brutal, and that's not what we wanted. I wanted to soften them a little bit, so they weren't necessarily going to be brutal. Hey, Wicker, you're in the game. Hidden Moon makes me laugh. If Mirage has not been discovered and this event pops up, Mirage shows up temporarily in the Mechatol Rex system for shenanigans, and then it disappears. Galactic Revolution, all laws in play are treated as though they are blank. They're not repealed or anything, and they're just temporarily suspended. There's just a revolution going on, somebody who's paying attention. Dulac Plague is, like a Grav Rift on infantry every time combat happens. Unless you're willing to pay money to research an inoculation and vaccinate your people. Yeah, just fun stuff to mess around with. The Chancellor Card. The primary has to deal with these Chancellor orders. You may attach any of your Chancellor orders to a strategy card. It remains attached until the strategy card is exhausted, then the order is purged. So, these things. So you can attach orders, and they're two-sided cards. one side tends to be a buff, the other side tends to be a nerf. So you can buff or nerf strategy cards based on who you think people are going to be taking or doing and moving stuff around. So that'll be fun. You got advisors that do stuff. You know, upkeep, spend 2 resources or 2 influence to ready this card. If you don't, he leaves. You know, upkeep, spend 1 command token to ready this card. If you don't want to spend a command token on the leader, he leaves. You know, just stuff to do stuff. And now we're getting around to the objectives. Yes. These are the contests that the regent can declare. And then you have 6 primary. Oop, I'm getting ready to break stuff. I just lost a card under the mat. Oh well. You explore, exploit, exterminate, exchange. Exploit, exterminate, exchange, explore, expand, exert. You know, you exchange resources, you exterminate enemies, you exploit opportunities, you expand your empire, you explore the galaxy and exert control and excel yourself. But then these thematically, you know, exploiting are all kinds of weird opportunistic things to try and, you know, opportunity cost type objectives is the idea. Extermination is pretty obvious. Space risk, blow stuff up. Exchanging is all economy based, looking at trade goods, coming up with trade goods and resources to do stuff. Expanding is expanding your empire, controlling territory. Exploring is research and technology and looking at the weird stuff in the cosmos. Exerting control is being big and intimidating and controlling things, but not necessarily directly controlling, but like intimidation and, you know, saying, hi, I'm a big dog, leave me alone. And then you get to your last objective type. These in the middle, there's 12 of each type, 5 2-pointers and 7 1-pointers, and then you have 6 secret objectives for each of those. These all collectively go together into one giant secret objective deck that has 36 cards in it. Big, I know, it's okay, you guys can handle it. And then stuff down here. But then you have the Exalt deck. This is what we start with in the beginning. There are no secrets for this. They just overlap on the boards here to keep things open. But these are quasi-collaborative, cooperative objectives. That people have to buy into and contribute towards in order to be able to score the VP. They're not scored until a certain condition is met. And then anybody who has contributed to it the right amount gets to score the victory point at that point. Spend 20 resources total. Place a control marker on this card when you spend 4 resources and score at the end of the status phase. So it'll go all the way to the end of the status phase, and it'll score once 20 resources have been hit, but everybody, if you don't have the resources to spend on it, or you were planning on doing a different resources or whatever, you may get locked out of this victory point. but you have to spend at least 4 to buy in to getting the victory point. These values may change because 20 resources is kind of brutal for a 3-player game, but you can do it. Good neighbors have at least 6 systems that contain units for multiple players. So every time you're sharing a system and you have units in a system with somebody else, you can put a marker on the thing and be able to score it. Score at the end of the status phase. So once there are 6 systems that have shared units, people have muddied the colors, you can score that one. 4 envoys. That's a terminology change. I gotta make it. But there's a ship where you've got this guy. The Consular Yacht is what it's supposed to be. 6 of these floating around Mechatol wrecks. You can score that point. These guys, these little ships. But again, it's a hard one to do because somebody can come along with a warship and decide, I'm going to blow up all the little, civilian ships around Mechatol because they didn't invite me to the party. So, quasi-cooperative stuff. And then new piece. Remove 10 units from the board. Place a control mark whenever you remove at least 2 units. Score at the end of the status phase. You're spending your units to put control markers on this. You're depopulating your armies. Yes, there will be a lot of ground forces placed on this. A lot of fighters popped for this. That's okay. It's still de-escalation. And then you get down to the end where the last guy is realizing, hey, I need to contribute. I can't have any of those things I'm comfortable getting rid of, and he ends up throwing like a cruiser or a destroyer or something into it to score the objective. But players are going to end up with these cards in their hands. Just grab a handful that are that are going to be going onto the docket. The first couple of turns, it'll be 1 card. It's no longer 1 victory point objectives only. It's 1 card. Somebody could put a 2-pointer out there if they have one. And it could go on the docket in those first couple of rounds because it's only 1 card. Then once you hit what used to be the round 2 objectives or 2 points, now you can put 2 cards out there. You could put 2 1-pointers down. You could put a 2-pointer and a 1-pointer as a docket item. You could put 2 2-pointers out there if you're feeling really crazy. And then people will roll their voting dice. You get voting dice off your diplomat. Your diplomat also determines your 2-hit value. You get 1 voting dice for every leader that you have unlocked. And then there are additional effects that can give you additional voting dice. You're just going to roll all those dice, see how many hits you get, and in order you're going to apply those hits to things. And I may get rid of the against tallies. But I may not. You just, you apply your hits. And every turn then, whatever's got the most 4 votes, that set of docket items is what is brought out and added to the scoreable objectives that turn. So in that case it would be this one. That's the most popular. So that means this docket slot is now empty and somebody else can put something in it. And now I'm making a mess. The quorum, don't worry about that. That's just basically, things can't sit on the docket forever. There is a threshold that slowly counts up. The first turn it's 1, and the second turn is 2, the next turn is 3. So that way there's, stuff on the dockets have to have activity or they get kicked off. So that's basically all it means. Not a big deal. It's actually pretty simple. But that's nobility. That's where we're at. a lot of systems, a lot of stuff mixed up, a lot of stuff confusing. But really, the actual core mechanics, I really have tried to do my best to repeat mechanically things that people are already familiar doing. Like rolling voting dice is an anti-fighter barrage for support on the docket items. Or bombardment, you know. There was a thing there about speech on these guys, right? Making a speech roll, speech 6 times 3, that's an anti-fighter barrage roll when you're voting in the agenda phase. So if your guild ship and your consular yachts are in orbit around Mechatol Rex, you can roll those at the beginning of the agenda phase to get some extra votes that you can spend on stuff. Or, you know, you can say, hi, I'm going to have my consular yacht vote for some additional votes on this one, and then roll its dice when you're casting your votes for that item anyway. And you could get an extra 3 votes that way. It's not much in the beginning, but by the time you had 5 or 6 people each throwing additional votes on that way, it adds up. So we'll see how it plays out, and go from there. So, you know, and the diplomats, you know, you get your consular yacht to Mechatol Rex, and you remove it, and you can upgrade your diplomat. And then you can exhaust this card to reduce the number of votes cast by a particular outcome by the influence you spend. So then you can spend influence to reduce somebody's count total. Basically, you're voting, I'm okay with anything but that result. Now, when there's only 2 things to vote on, it's not such a big deal. But when you have multiple things being voted on, now you can vote against somebody if you've upgraded your diplomat. Could play out in very interesting ways. I look forward to play testing and finding out. One more last thing about the nobility turn order. In the status phase, you do your basic upkeep stuff, and then there are cabinet actions. There are some actions which will only be done, this is where it kind of goes into that quasi-cooperative thing. Some actions are only done if somebody has the appropriate title to do it. So in addition to juggling, hi, I want to get these rolls and get these strategy tokens or strategy cards to further my goals in the Empire, I also need to take certain roles sometimes to keep the Empire functioning, or make sure that somebody is taking those roles to keep the Empire functioning. If nobody takes the Commissar token, nobody's the Commissar, the roles, you know, your command tokens are not removed from the map. If nobody's the Chancellor, there's minimum voting going on. If nobody takes the Speaker, you don't get your action card. Well, Speaker is, that's the typo. Speaker is actually not there. That's up in the upkeep. I've already fixed it in my notes. Remember I said stuff that I've already figured out I needed to move because I screwed it up? The Administrator. If nobody's the Administrator, planets don't refresh. If nobody's the Treasurer, you don't do the economy stuff where you're putting trade goods out on the map on certain buildings. If nobody's the Admiral, nobody's taking care of the ships, and anything that's wounded or damaged doesn't get repaired. Nobody takes the Inquisitor, all those techs that exhaust, suddenly they don't refresh anymore. If nobody's the Chamberlain, nobody gets to draw their free objective. I may change some of these around. Nobody's the Regent? Well, if somebody's the Regent, however, they can trigger a missing cabinet step. So they can make sure that something happens. Oh, nobody took the Commissar, I'm the Regent, we're going to do that anyway. And, you know, the outline's here. I got a more detailed version elsewhere, but it's all here, and I think it'll all work. So, anyway, that has been my introduction to what is nobility, to give you a rough outline. If you would like to get a copy of the saves, you can fumble through this stuff a little closer. That can be arranged. Let me know. That's all I have for you. This is Philroy, signing off. I'll see you around the game table.